All right, hey folks, it is October the 6th, and we are going to discuss more on World War One and its aftermath today. Um, Thursday, we're going to have a short quiz over vocabulary terms that we've had in this course. So that's over all prior units. If you're confused about what those terms are, if you look back on my PowerPoint notes that I put on Google Classroom, it's on the first slides there. You'll find those terms. So terms like referendum, rubber baron, stuff like that. All right, so we left off when we were talking about how the American forces were now entering the war, and they had just managed to hold off a German offensive because the German troops, hey ladies, the Germans were now no longer fighting the Russians. Russia was having a lot of internal problems. Where first off they had dethroned the Tsar, and they set up something like their term is the Duma. The Duma is their term for like their parliament, where they have like senators and stuff like that. But then you're going to have the communists take over, and they're going to get the Russians out. Hey, what do we see here?
It's a picture.
That's a tank. Picture of a tank. That's right. I'm glad you don't think it's a real tank. All right, so during this war, it's the war of industry. So all of these great powers have machinery and factories. They have innovation, and it's all geared towards the war effort. And you have one technology try to overcome the other, and that's what a tank is. Essentially, they take a tractor, they armor it up, they put it on treads, and they put a weapon on it. The whole point of a tank is, remember, the war was flipped on its head because the invention of the machine gun, which is totally decimating cavalry and infantry. It's poor, soft-skinned, unarmored, biological people just getting turned into hamburger meat. But the tank can repel that machine gun fire from the machine guns of the time. I don't think they had really heavy armor-piercing machine guns in this war. And so the tank could crush through these machine gun nests, take them out, and allow the soldiers to then take the trenches. And you see it's long, it's wide, it's on treads. So that's in case, so it can get over the rough terrain that's been shelled by artillery, and also climb over trenches as well. So you also have advancements in things like you start having early airplanes that are able to do reconnaissance, where they can look around and see where troops are. Information is everything in battle, and occasionally do some bombing. And not that much, though. So, moving on. This battle led to this is the battle that Pershing is going to lead, the general in charge of U.S. forces. This battle led to a stunning one-day victory for U.S. forces, allowing our troops to link up with the larger Allied offensive at the Argonne Forest. By October, the Battle of the Argonne Forest became the last major assault of the war, and one of the most intense as well. So American forces managed to get in at the end of the war. And the good thing about that is, one, is our casualty rate by the end of the war is going to be kind of low compared to our allies and the enemy. And also, we're going to be able to help seal the deal and finish it. So during this battle, many Americans performed outstanding feats of valor. I have a couple examples for you. This guy here, though an avowed pacifist. What's a pacifist? If I'm a pacifist and you slap me, what is it? What am I going to do? A lie? Yeah.
What did you say?
What's a pacifist? It comes from
Someone
I said something else.
Like fighting or something.
violence. It comes from the Latin word pax. Pax is peace, right? So, yeah, right. So, yeah, a pacifist is someone who believes in like nonviolence, even if you do something bad to him. So, like Sergeant York here, he's this guy from Tennessee. It's kind of like a redneck guy who grew up kind of like really rough childhood, a lot of fighting and drinking and stuff like that. But he's going to become a born again Christian, and when he does, he's going to swear off violence. Whenever he goes into training, because he's drafted to go into the service, he's going to take a lot of He's going to get a lot of insults and things like that because he keeps telling him, I'm not going to shoot anybody. Eventually, though, I think you're thinking about a World War II movie. Eventually, about a different guy. He's going to have a change of heart and realize that the war is just and there is a certain time to do killing and things like that. And he's going to be a very good shot. And so he grew up as a turkey hunter. And so whenever he's fighting a turkey hunter, turkeys gobble gobble. So, like Thanksgiving. Well, here, listen up. So what he's going to do is he goes up and he sees the German lines and he's going to give a turkey call. And like the Germans will like raise their head, like wondering what's that weird sound because they don't have turkeys in Germany. And then shoots them in the head. And he managed to do this to about 25 of them. And then the rest of them just flat. He's going to take out also machine gun nests doing this. And then he's going to capture 132 Germans. And be like, wow, this one guy just killed 25 of us, took out a machine gun nest. Let's not mess with him. And so that's going to be one of his acts of heroism. He's like the godfather of American snipers, So moving on from there, you have Harry J. Adams. He's going to manage to trick 300 Germans to give themselves up as prisoners when all he had was an empty pistol. So another act of valor there. So if they had known, or like 300 guys, right? 300 armed guys, even if it was an armed pistol, that's not really a good deterrent. But it goes to show, we're going to see a lot of the Germans realized that the writing was on the wall. The war was about to be over. And so they didn't want to die for a cause they were going to lose anyways, right? So following this battle, Germans' military leaders were demanding that their government seek peace because they saw that Germany at this time, it was running really low on supplies. A lot of its population had just been decimated, killed, and maimed. And that after this loss, there was no path to victory. So they were going to, their own king, Kaiser Wilhelm, will leave the throne, and the fighting will stop at 11 a.m. November, which is the 11th month, on the 11th day. We call that Armistice Day. So an armistice is when you make an agreement to lay down your arms. It's a ceasefire. It's not necessarily a peace treaty yet. It's not permanent, but it's a ceasefire so you can work on a peace treaty. Because it's kind of hard to work on peace while you're still killing each other. Though it does happen, and we'll see that it's going to happen, say like the Vietnam War, the Korean War. There's still going to be a lot of fighting going on while there's peace negotiations and stuff like that. But get to that when we get to that. Yes.
This is off topic,
Okay.
but how do you know the online kids aren't cheating on every quiz and test you give them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's why.
Oh, no, I'm
No,
just like.
see that, like, unfortunately, the best thing we can do is that's why whenever they give the equipment to the
Did you
parents.
say you would you test for plagiarism or whatever?
Now, the essays I could test for plagiarism, but I can't do that for the choice. So that's why, like, when parents make the agreement to do the online option, they're supposed to make sure that their kids are having academic honesty. How they do that, I don't know. I'm not psychic. But, and the thing is, like, if it's dual credit course, I have something called Honor Lock. And what that does is it freezes the browser, and they can only have that one page open. Even then, they could get a phone out, right? Yeah, right. Or there's some places where they have, or maybe that's UT Tyler, where they have it where you're supposed to take the device and you like scan around with the camera to make sure you're not holding something else. But again, you could still hide something, right? It's really hard to have academic honesty outside of a physical human being checking on you, right, Elijah? So can you put the phone on? All right, so yeah, I mean, we just have to trust. But the thing is, though, when they come back to school, they haven't been paying attention. They're gonna be messed up because they're gonna come in, not gonna know anything, start failing. Be like, how'd you go from
the TikToks with the guys or like the dog in like 20 future or something like that, the doctors who were in med school in 2020,
Oh,
they're gonna be
yeah.
like, so what's wrong with me? And doctors gonna be like, I don't know.
Ah.
Put on all their exams.
I've really been kind of worried about that, like the lost generation, right? Like, because there's like whole cities where they're not even doing online because they're just like they're just afraid it's too stressful, you know. So it's like, what are you going to do whenever you have like a whole generation of Americans that didn't go to school for basically a year or so? It's tough business. So I don't know. Sounds pretty rough. You already go on to the next one.
No,
But that's-
yes.
I mean, that's why y'all are so awesome. Y'all are like learning. You're working hard. You're going through all that pain and misery, and you're forced to. Okay.
On campus.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand. If I was your age, I'd probably be like, I'm doing this at home, and then I wouldn't do
No,
it.
I actually want to like try. And go
Good. Well, see, I might not have known what was best for me back then. So, so like we were saying, there's victory. With victory, there's rejoice. So see, rejoicing. So, by the end of the war, more than 2 million American troops were in France. So this gave like lifeblood into the Allies. Like now they outnumbered the Germans and their allies by 600,000 men. And that was a big determining factor in why Germany quit. The war's been going on for a while. It's been a stalemate for a long time. Before the war was over, 32 nations had declared war on the Central Powers. Now, of course, a lot of these nations, you could think of them as old imperial holdings of nations like France and England, places like Australia, Canada, and so on, some of the places in Africa and India and stuff like that. Though the world rejoiced in the announcement for peace, the casualty rate was enormous. So what's a casualty? A casualty is somebody who is taken out of the fight through injuries or death. So that's the war dead and the war wounded. You can be a temporary casualty. You can just be injured, you heal up, patch you up, and go back to the war front. But we're talking about more of a permanent basis. Although nearly 9 million soldiers died in the war, 1.8 million were Germans, 1.7 were Russians, 1.4 were French, 1.2 were Austrian and Hungarian. Almost 1 million were British, and 48,000 were American. So you see, compared to our allies, we're pretty low there. So, for one, the war was not on our soil. For two, we stepped in there, stepped in and helped out. And two, we got in there towards the end and we helped push for the win of the war. We're going to see, like in World War II, we're not going to just jump in the beginning either, but in World War II, we are going to face a lot of casualties in that one because we're going to be in some for one, we're going to fight also the Japanese, and for two, we're going to have some really rough battles, like Battle of the Bulge and so forth, and of course, like D-Day and all that. All right, so the demographics of Europe would be shattered for generations. So demographics has to do with the measurement of people, right? So we're talking about like how many people they are, for example. Like France lost half of its men from the ages of 20 to 32. That's the guys who're supposed to be the next generation of fathers at this time, like teachers and doctors, guys working in factories and farms. We're not saying that women weren't doing these things, but especially back then, it was mostly males. And so that set back their economy and many, many other things for the country during this time. Over 20 million soldiers altogether would become permanently disabled from their injuries sustained during the battle. Medicine wasn't that good back then, especially things like surgery or reconstructive surgery, which was just like a dream. So if your arm was shattered or snotted up, or like same with your legs, it was just gone. A lot of people came back blind from not just projectile injuries, but also things like poisonous gas leading to permanent blindness and stuff like that. So it's very devastating. And this is just the military losses. Keep in mind, millions of civilians face things like starvation, death, and exploitation, losing their homes and their property forever. And of course, losing family members can totally destroy a family. So this was a very, very traumatic and devastating war. But we're going to see that World War II in some ways is going to be traumatic in another way. In fact, for things like art and stuff like that, World War One is going to totally like do away with what you call the romantic period of art. Because of just the amount of death and stuff, art starts to become a little more cynical of humanity, where it's just like, look, people are great, but we can just totally chop each other to bits, and it doesn't make sense. Whereas before this, you had the idea of like romantic ideas of like people in their nations and doing heroic acts of valor and stuff like that. So it's going to be very traumatic for the Western cultures in general. You ready to move on? Or you need me to keep it up for a minute? Oh, wait. You okay, Rebecca? Rebecca, you okay? Okay, kind of. Yeah. End of the day.
And then
Cool. At least it's not fifth period, because then I wrote it out. All right. We're ready to move on to the next one. SpaghettiOs. So like I told you, there's a lot of problems that the war brings about. And some good things in a way. Like the war is going to lead to the fall of the great Ottoman Empire, which had been around for a long time, ever since the Ottoman Turks came in, conquered Arabia, North Africa, and other places that Muslims were in charge. Well, they're also going to have a lot of Eastern Europe, and that's going to fall apart and fragment. And then you're going to have European powers, especially England and France, make a lot of the modern African and especially Muslim countries we have today. And they didn't really ask those people's permission or their opinions on it either. But also, you're going to see the dethronement of the Russian Tsar. So the monarchies that have been in charge of Russia for over 1,000 years are now going to be overthrown. You're going to have that guy, Vladimir Lenin, is going to be the figurehead of the Red Revolution, the October Revolution, which is going to bring communism to Russia. Something that's going to be a big part of our conversations in the following units, especially after World War II. So during 1918 and 1919, a pandemic form of influenza known as Spanish flu killed around 500,000 Americans, and we talked about this. And of course, as we found out, this in many ways is related to modern day bird flu. It was very deadly to a lot of Americans, but didn't have good treatment back then and things like that. So many more Americans and people around the world would die of this virus than the war. But the war was a really big thing. It was violent. It was national. It's something people can control. So it was definitely on the news a lot more. The war also greatly changed the map of Europe and the world. I need to get a map to show y'all the changes before and after of Europe. I tried to find one earlier, but I need to get you a better one. In March of 1917, the Russian people faced severe poverty and hunger due to the war. It was very devastating. World War I and World War II, some of the nastiest fighting is actually going to be on the Russian front. So on the east, between the Germans and the Russians. So you're going to have dissent. They're going to be very mad at their king, the Tsar Nicholas. And so you're going to have these guys pro-parliamentarians. Parliament is kind of like, it's a government where you basically have Congress in charge, but it has it's set up in a way to where you can make laws faster. Like the American system of government was made to make laws slowly on purpose, so that if we try to propose a law, we had enough time to think about it before we did it. Parliament's the other way around. It's about making laws as fast as possible to address problems as fast as possible. That's why parliamentarian governments usually have a lot more laws than republics like America. So they're going to try to make one of these parliaments like in Europe. But the thing is, it's going to be overrun. It's going to be overrun by a group of Marxists called the Bolsheviks. And their leader, with the help of their leader, Vladimir Lenin, essentially a handful of armed men are going to go into the Duma, their Congress, and take over and say, no, now we're in charge. So it was so chaotic when they were trying to convert to a different kind of government. It was taken over by just like, I don't know, it's like something like 70 odd guys with rifles went inside and said, no, we're going to do it this way or else. And they did it that way. Vladimir Lenin as their leader, the new government made peace with the Germans in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. I think that's how you say it. I could have said it wrong. But this is during World War I. So the Allies needed Russia there, but they had political troubles. And so then the communists take over, and the communists at first disavowed war. But the thing is, a lot of Russians are going to come home from the war. They're not going to like what's happening. They're going to say, hey, you can't do that. You can't just take our government. Because what the communists were doing, they were threatening to do a whole lot of terrible things. They like illegalize Christianity, like take away people's land and property, force kids to go into schools that taught them about how evil their country was and things like that. And so you're going to have a civil war following this in Russia anyways. So the Russians, however, because they were anti-nationalist, is what they called themselves, they uncovered a lot of the secret treaties that even their allies had to divide up Germany. So they were like, look, we might have taken over the government, but just look how bad these governments are. Because one of the big things about communism is you believe in a worldwide revolution. Now, if we had more time in the course, we talk about what the characteristics of Marxism are. I usually talk about it more in the senior level course in Tech Government. But yeah, Marxism is based on a lot of ideas, like the idea that materialism is like the end of all life. Like you don't live for necessarily a higher purpose. What you live for is to fulfill certain needs such as hunger, thirst, tired, boredom, the desire to procreate, things like that. And it tries to do away with the idea of owning things, where things should be kind of given up in a democratic manner to all the people and shared and stuff like that. Holding science above all things is almost a form of religion. So but the problem is it can dehumanize people and lead to many, many deaths. So that's going to be Russia. We'll talk about that a bit more, though, once we move on. We'll mostly talk about Stalinist Russia, not so much Leninist. Henry, you okay? You okay? You okay? Look like you're kind of having trouble there. But yeah, before we leave today, we got to wipe down the tables. So. I've been wiping them down like at the end of the day and stuff, but we need to make sure we do it every period. So.
like, for next year, we should like, engineering classes,
That would be cool.
maybe to inspire people.
Who would teach that? Does Mr. Biddle know anything about engineering? Because I know Mr. Hamilton's like a biology guy.
I think this year, they're little good teachers. Like,
I know Mr. Hamilton used to do a robotics club.
I
Before he
think
came here.
that kind of boosts people's idea, like, what they want to do in the future.
Hmm.
And then like, if they want to do something like engineering, that would give them like a good idea of like.
Right.
What they want.
Hmm.
So they can know.
That's the thing about engineering. It's like, if you really want to get into it, it's like math heavy. That's one thing I know about it. But yeah, see, I've never taken an engineering course.
Like, for our close, we do engineering. Because remember last year, we made our own. I thought.
You can, if you get like a few, like, I forgot how many students, but you need several students. And so, and you got to get a teacher to sponsor it, and you have to submit it to the office for approval. Yeah, you had that. How would you do an engineering club?
I know something about engineering.
Like what? Like
Mechanical stuff like gears and stuff like that. And I'm like good with like is it avionics? I don't know. It's like aerodynamics engineering. I do a lot of that stuff.
Huh. Well, I know this, when it comes to clubs, you have to do your own fundraising to get supplies too. Because I don't think they really use the school budget on it.
Yeah.
And so you'd have to figure out how you have that tackled. And you need a teacher to sponsor it. And the thing is about clubs is some clubs, the teachers can lead it, but it's kind of like, it's kind of preferred if the students do everything, you know?
Yeah.
So,
So say if I want to start a club, like kind of start it like for example like today or does that have to be like a second day?
you could like start it today, but you could start getting the people together
Like
today.
getting people like
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so like if you know other people wanted to do it, if you know the teacher wanted to do it. I don't know the first thing about engineering. So it's like I could be there for it if you couldn't find anybody else. But yeah, see, I wouldn't even know other than like online resources where to go or like how to do anything. So I don't know. It's something worth investigating. Like I said, find people, make things happen. Hey folks, let's go on to the next one. So, hey, who's that guy right here? Remember? No, it's not.
Wait, what did you say?
Who is this guy? No, it's not Teddy. It's a guy, two guys after him. Wilson, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is going to be the first U.S. president to actually go overseas as a president. And he's going to go to the peace talks and to make sure that they go the way he wants them to, or at least try to, after World War I. So, Wilson was disgusted by the secret deals that Russia uncovered in the warfare in Europe and drew up his desires for a worldwide changes in what were known as his 14 points. You are going to need to know what you don't need to know what all the 14 points are, but you need to know that Wilson pushed for the 14 points because when you take your EOC, I can almost guarantee there's going to be a question about that. Yes,
How do you say that word? Is that-
Czechoslovakia?
Wait, what? Czechoslovakia?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, so these points, hey ladies, so these points called for, you need to know these items. No secret treaties, freedom of the seas, that means you can trade without restriction. Reduction of trade barriers in general. Self-determination, that means countries get to be in charge of themselves, essentially. and the creation of a General Association of Nations. So he's asking for basically like an early United Nations, an early UN. In December of 1918, he arrived in France for the peace conferences in Versailles. And at this time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was no more. It fell apart. But it created, when it fell apart into Austria and Hungary, it also created the new nations of Poland and Czechoslovakia. These are going to be important for World War II. And we're going to see that there's at least Poland's still around today. Czech Republic's still around today. German monarchy vanished into a republic. The Russian monarchy disintegrated into communism. And the Ottoman Empire was set up for division. Pick the wrong side, they picked the losing side. And so now it's going to be, and the thing is, Western powers for quite a few years have been eyeballing the Ottoman Empire to dismantle it for some time. It fell apart administratively, economically. It was no longer even controlling itself. Its military was backwards. And so France and Britain really wanted to control them for some good cash. And though most of the nations were represented at the peace conference, some were not, such as Germany and Russia. The Russians weren't allowed to join in because the other nations viewed their communist government as illegitimate. Germany wasn't allowed to participate because they were very mad at Germany. But Britain, Italy, France, and America made most of the decisions. So that's the four leading powers within these peace talks. But we're going to see almost everything that Britain and France wants, it gets. They're going to give America some lip service, but a lot of the things Woodrow Wilson's going to call for isn't going to necessarily come into light. You'll see those in just a minute. You okay, Rebecca? Okay. I think second and third period are the most attentive classes. Not tired anymore. Don't have the post-lunch sleepiness yet. There's studies to actually show that the classes people do the best in are the ones right after PE or athletics. Something about exercise makes people more open to learning.
It opens your mind.
It's true. Absolutely true. If I had my way, math class, which, and reading classes would always, or writing classes would always be after some kind of physical activity. Or you could just break it in. Physical class, physical class, physical class, physical class. That's not tenable. No. All right, you ready for the last one?
Picture.
A picture.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the same picture. Shoot. Okay. All right, last one for the day. Though the Allies begrudgingly accepted Wilson's 14 points, remember freedom of the seas, make a general council for world peace, self-determination where nations get to pick who's they're in charge. We are a people who all speak the same language, therefore we all live in the same general area, therefore we need our own country. He was forced to compromise on many of these issues. The Treaty of Versailles, you need to know this, the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I, and it had harsh terms on Germany. The Germans weren't even allowed to have a voice in its making. And so, we shall see. The treaty called for reparations from Germany. Reparations are whenever you are found guilty of something, and then you have to pay it back, right, as a punishment. So they had to lose a lot of their land. They also lost their Navy and Merchant Marine. Merchant Marine is like, it's like vessels that help out your Navy, but they're not armed, right? They do a lot of shipping and stuff for the government during wartime. A severe shrinking of its army, and it had to accept blame for the entire war. So they also had to pay the Allied countries, especially France, a lot of money every year, so much more money than they could actually do. They're actually not able to open up a lot of their industries either. And so they're going to have a lot of restrictions on that. This is going to lead to a lot of resentment and anger by Germans who are going to be made very poor by this peace treaty. So they're kind of asking for a second world war. When they think they're crushing Germany, they're actually just going to make them more angry. The treaty also called for the creation of the League of Nations. This is to help make Wilson happy and create buffer states to protect Western Europe from communism. We talked about buffer states last time we were together. Buffer states are when you have, so like I said, Europe was scared to death of the communist revolution. So Eastern European countries were created out of like the corpse of Russia and Germany in order to be like a blocker zone to protect from the communist Russians and protect Western Europe from them. Many nations feared that communism would spread into their borders as clandestine cells of Marxists could be found throughout Europe. They thought this was going to be like the French Revolution all over again, when instead of Marxists, they had guys called Jacobins trying to instigate European revolutions in other countries. So they're like, no, we played that game before, don't want to do it again. In 1919, Germany too nearly had its own communist revolution during an unsuccessful uprising. So after the First World War, there was so much political instability, so much poverty, they almost went communist as well. So other European countries were very scared of this, because whenever they take over your country, the first thing they do is they usually kill the government people. So government people don't necessarily like to have one of those. And that's going to do it for our lecture today.
Yay.
So we will come back on Thursday. We'll have a short vocabulary quiz, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video or the lecture. And then we'll finish up with this unit. I'll see you later, kids.